I answered that until November 5th, when Donald Trump won re-election. And the whole network of faith-based diplomacy was pulled into his cabinet. The jobs that were given to the people were people in our network for decades. Paula White, Mike Huckabee, Pete Hegseth, Christopher Waltz, Elise Stefanik, Marco Rubio. These are all people who stood with Israel through thick and thin because of a deep sense of faith. We have with us here at this table the generals in the army of faith-based diplomacy. Each one of them are people who for decades, even before the establishment of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and the Israelite Foundation, understood that God had a purpose and that Jews and Christians needed to unite to fulfill that purpose and defend our Judeo-Christian values. And so today is the culmination of that faith-based diplomacy. It's the culmination of that as Christians around the world are getting it in their hearts that now is the time for sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I've never seen something like this happen. Christians and organizations spontaneously are all now saying, this is the time for sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I was at CPAC last week and they passed a resolution at CPAC calling for sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. There are pastors who are speaking about this. There are politicians who are saying this is the time. It's like what we saw over the last 70 years where Jews were getting in their hearts that idea that now is the time to move to Israel. God is doing something amazing. And we are witnessing it here today. I'm so excited to release this resolution, and to do that, I'd like to call up our first speaker, and someone who I've known for a very long time. In fact, before the creation of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, I met with the leadership of an organization called the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem. I didn't really know Christians. I didn't really know what Christians thought. But I knew they were our only allies. So I met with them and I said, what do you think? Is this going to work? Can Christians and Jews work together? Is this something that's going to be a success? Can we build a new relationship between Jews and Christians in the 21st century? And Susan Michaels, who I'm going to ask to come up and read the resolution in a second, said, not only will it work, but this is what God wanted us to do. So today, we are being obedient to the God of Israel, to the prophecies of Israel, and to the Bible of Israel. And we are standing firm and saying, now is the time for sovereignty. Please welcome the President of the ACLI and the U.S. Director of the International Christian Embassy, Dr. Susan Michaels.
Stirred up memories of my own, which go back to 1980, a time when Christians stood up to the nations of the world. And that was when all the embassies moved out of Jerusalem in protest of it being the capital of the state of Israel, and the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem was born. The founders said, we do not support what our governments have done, and therefore we're starting an international Christian embassy in Jerusalem that represents the millions of Bible-based Christians around the world who understand the significance of Jerusalem because of our Bible, and who stand with Israel at this moment. What a joy it was, how many years later, when the U.S. Embassy was moved to Jerusalem. And I tell you, we prophetically held that ground for decades.
Amen.
And we knew one day it would turn around. One day the embassies would come back. And what a joy it was in 2018 to see that moment happen. I feel like we're in a similar moment now over another issue, and that being of Israeli sovereignty. If October the 7th taught us anything, it was the fallacy of the two-state solution. It is not a solution, it is an illusion. Gaza was a Palestinian Palestinian state. And look at what it produced. So why does the Western world continue to push Israel to give up territory for a Palestinian state? It will not work. Gaza proved it. And until these billionaire Arab leaders stop lining their own pockets with money, they're not going to stop the war. They're not going to stop fighting. They're not going to go for peace. Why would they? It's made them billionaires, the war. So it's time that we speak up. We've been quiet for a while on this issue, but now is the moment, and with this administration. So we have presented a resolution that we will be sending to the president that really emphasizes that this Judea and Samaria is the biblical heartland. And because it's biblical, it has ties to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel. And all we're asking is that the powers of the world stop pressuring Israel to give it up. That is a pretty simple, so let me read it for you. Jewish people have an enduring historical and biblical connection to Judea and Samaria, also known as the biblical heartland, whereas archaeological discoveries and physical evidence continuously reaffirm the Jewish people's historic presence in this region, whereas Judea and Samaria contain some of the most significant biblical sites, including Bethel, Hebron, Shiloh, Beit Shan, Bethlehem, Shechem, Jericho, and many others. Whereas key biblical figures such as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, King David, King Solomon, the prophets, and in the New Testament, Jesus and the apostles lived, owned land, fought battles, taught, judged, and traveled extensively throughout Judea and Samaria, shaping the region's character and history. Whereas, despite modern propaganda claiming the contrary, Jesus was born a Jewish man in the Jewish city of Bethlehem, home of his ancestor King David, and traveled, preached, and ministered in the Roman-occupied Jewish Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Whereas despite centuries of forced exile leading to the Jewish diaspora, a continuous Jewish presence remained in the land of Israel, including the biblical heartland. Whereas even during 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people maintained an unbroken connection to their heritage through language, religion, and culture, and shared a collective yearning to return to the land. And whereas the modern Jewish presence and sovereignty over Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria has brought tangible blessings to the land, as foretold in Scripture, improving the standard of living, safeguarding religious freedoms and sites, preserving the region's history, and enhancing the lives of all of its inhabitants. Therefore, be it resolved that the undersigned signatories reaffirm the Jewish people's inalienable right to the biblical heartland of Israel and reject all efforts, both from the United States and the international community, to pressure the Jewish people to relinquish their ancestral homeland in Judea and Samaria. Thank you for your signatures on this resolution. I think that we're probably at about 200 tonight after our activity today. And so with that, I'd like to invite up to the podium Troy Miller, the CEO and President of the National Religious Broadcasters. And thank you, Troy, for everything.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Josh. And in the future, I prefer to be known as Admiral, as a Navy guy. In all seriousness, this started over a year ago when Josh and some others reached out to me, and we were talking about, after my trips to Israel, this idea of a two-state solution. And we started to talk about a resolution that talked about a single state. I said, Josh, we have to educate people first. And so if you'll remember at NRB last year at this time, we launched a resolution with the Keep God's Land to get media to understand that there is no such thing as the West Bank. There is only Judea and Samaria. And we launched this there, and we put this resolution out. We did a press conference. We had a number of organizations picked it up. We pushed it wide and far into the Christian media. I did a number of press hits, media hits myself, to talk about this over the next several months, and then even throughout the year whenever it would come up. And I believe that this resolution is a direct result of that. Last year we started with the messaging to help people understand what the true aspect of the land is. I spoke at a number of churches, and I would hold up my Bible and I would say to people, open your Bible, go here to Genesis, and it said God promised Abraham. And we call it the promised land. It is the promised land. It was the land that God promised. Creator of the universe. The one person who could designate any place on this planet and rightfully give it away to a people was God. And God did that. And I said, now fast forward, go to your New Testament. And Jesus ministered in Judea. Jesus ministered in Samaria. This is the land that God has given to the Jewish people. And we know that even the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans, when he talks about the Jewish people, he says, the promises of God are irrevocable. They're irrevocable. This land is sovereign land to the Jewish people, not because we say so, not because anybody on this planet says so. It's sovereign land to the Jewish people because God said so. And so now our second phase of this, and it's really a testament to the power of messaging. I don't think, Josh, if we would have not done that last year, we would be here this year. I really think it's the power of messaging, and it's the power of unity, and it's unity in the message that made this happen. And now we need to see that same unity come together and that same messaging come together so that we speak, and I'm going to talk to us in the Christian community, we speak in the Christian community one message and one voice. This land belongs to the Jewish people because God said so. And that is what we will carry forward with. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce David Parsons. He's got a great bio. He's an attorney, a journalist, a minister, a Middle East specialist. He's a vice president at ICEJ and spokesman for them. He's on the staff of in Jerusalem for 22 years. David has forgotten more about Jerusalem than I've learned yet. And so he's going to come up and share with us his thoughts on what's going on here as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Troy. That's good preaching. I bring greetings from Jerusalem. It's wonderful to be here at this event. And if we're going with this motif of generals, I guess right now I'm going to wear my judge advocate general hat and play the lawyer for us, helping to understand some of the legal consequences of what we're doing this evening. And I want to take us back for a moment to the year 2000, after the Camp David Accords, where Ehud Barak had, once it it came out publicly in the media in Israel, that he had actually put Jerusalem, right down to the heart of Jerusalem, on the table. And there were some very prominent Jewish leaders at the time, still prominent in my mind. Ron Lauder, now he's president of the World Jewish Congress. I think at the time he was head of the Jewish National Fund. And Natan Sharansky, the great refusnik, and such a wonderful, principled man. They called for a rally in Jerusalem to reassert Israel's claim to a united Jerusalem and make the statement that the city would not, and not then and not ever, be put on the negotiating table. And over 400,000 people showed up at the rally at the time. It was the largest public protest in Israel. Remember, I got in touch with Ron Lauder and Sharansky and said, we're going to bring Christians there. And it was wonderful to stand with the Jewish people in making that statement. I tell you, the crowd stretched all the way back from, we were at Jaffa Gate, it stretched all the way back to Zion Square at the bottom of Ben Yehuda. It was massive. And I think it got the job done at that moment. When you think of Kairos moments where a statement has to be made. And I think it's time to say the same thing about Judea and Samaria. Because for decades, the international community has put these areas on the bargaining table over and over again as part of the two-state solution, and yet it's been in vain. The reason is that the Palestinians have never wanted some rump state in Gaza and what they call the West Bank. They want the whole land, and that's not just Hamas, the PLO as well. And October 7 was proof of this maximalist agenda, heinous proof of it. And I would cite President Isaac Herzog, who for many years was a proponent of the two-state solution. When the guy has been a powerful moral voice for the people of Israel since October 7. Soon after, he's on one of the major TV networks, and they're asking him about, what about, can we get back to the peace process, the two-state solution? And he said, no Israeli in their right mind right now is ready to even think about a Palestinian state. It would be such a horrible reward for terrorism. And it's time, the time is ripened for a new approach in which we as Christians join the Jewish people and the people of Israel in encouraging that nation to reassert its sovereignty, its claim, and superior title to Judea and Samaria. After all, this is the biblical heartland. Some 85% of the place names in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, are in areas that the world considers occupied Palestinian territory. That includes Jerusalem. For Christians, this is where Jesus and the disciples walked as well. And the international community at one point recognized that the Jewish people, back with the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the San Remo Conference of 1920, and the League of Nations mandate of 1922, the international community recognized they did not create some new right or claim for the Jewish people in the land. What they did was simple. They recognized that the Jews had an historic, spiritual, and legal connection to this land pre-existing. They recognized something that already existed. They didn't create new rights for the Jewish people in that sense. And another important legal point in this battle that we'll be fighting to reassert this title and claim, for some would say, well, what we're doing, you're asking Israel to annex Judea and Samaria. No, you cannot, as a legal principle, you cannot annex something that you already own. Everyone got that? Okay. But it's time for, I've said it for years, that even Israelis, with all the offers to hand it over for a Palestinian state because of all the pressure from the outside world, even Israelis got conditioned to saying, well, we own it, but we need to give it away to have peace and all. And you undermine, you actually put a cloud of title on your own claim and open the door to the legal principle called adverse possession. You've got someone with a hostile intent, and the world has done this for so long, and I've said over and over, Israel needs to start reasserting its claim and title to something it already owns. And if it wants to make peace, or to, in some way, to share their land, share these areas in some sort of autonomy or whatever, that's fine. That's for the people of Israel to decide. But we think that our nation, America, needs to allow Israel some space for this, and as Christians, we need to join our voice in that we believe in God's covenant with Abraham. That this was promised. These areas are part of the land promised as an everlasting possession to Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob. Genesis 17 and verse 8. No more pressure from Washington for a two-state solution. Give Israel room to work out its issues and problems and peace with its Arab neighbors without the pressure of terrorism and international pressure. And I think part of this is to also help not only pray, but to advocate and work for reinvigorating the whole momentum of the Abraham Accords, which by their very name, the Abraham Accords, was a recognition by some of these Arab countries that the Jews and Arabs have this common connection to the region, that the Jews were indigenous to this region, and this is a good process that we need to also get behind. But we're at a unique moment where we have a president who will listen to us. He's the gift that keeps on giving. But I think he needs to hear from us. Judea and Samaria, as far as concerned, post-October 7, whatever you thought before, it has to be taken off the table. And Israel, we need to help them and stand with them in reasserting their superior, from time immemorial, claim and connection to these lands. Thank you. I now have the privilege of introducing Larry Hutch. I know most of you probably know him. Otherwise, you've been living in a cave prepping for the apocalypse. But he's a great Bible teacher, and especially on Hebraic roots, and also an important asset for Josh Reinstein and the Israel Allies Foundation in bringing Christian support into that organization. Josh, he's been on your top 50 Christian Zionist leaders for a while, but Larry, please come.
Thank you.